All the Lee family wanted was a home filled with warmth and prosperity, but instead, they opened the gates of hell. Welcome to the Paranormal Post. I'm Clayton Morris. If you love true stories of the unexplained, then go ahead and smash that like button. It really helps. And also subscribe to the channel. And there's one more little thing you can do. That's to turn on the notification bell so you'll receive a notification when we publish a brand new video. Well, the dream of Steve and Beth Lee and their two sons was to live in the beautiful Black Forest region of Colorado. For 4 years, they rented homes in the densely forested area in northeast Colorado Springs, before finding a spacious 2-story log home just off of Swan Road in the thickest part of the woods. What they didn't know was that the former tenant of the house was convinced the property was haunted, but didn't mention anything about it. Certainly not to the realtor, certainly not on a disclosure before selling the property, and didn't want to say anything for fear of being ridiculed. The unsuspecting Lee family, they signed a lease in May 1991. They moved into the picturesque house, and a year later, they decided to purchase the 5-acre parcel. That was when their problems began. Within weeks of buying their new home, the gates of hell opened up on them. Beth says, "One day we came home, and it was like the 4th of July in our living room and in our bedroom. We had all kinds of lights flashing through, and it sounded like people stomping across the roof. We would lay in bed at night and hear chains rattling. One night we woke up, and we heard orchestra music. Strange things started happening every day," she said. Their sons complained of weird lights and shadows in their rooms. Lights and appliances started going on and off all by themselves. And suddenly, they found untraceable chemical odors was burning family members' eyes and throats. Steve Lee, a 34-year-old professional truck driver, firmly believed that someone was trying to scare his family out of their new home. But the Louisiana-born man told me that he has, quote, just enough redneck left to fight back against the elusive presence no matter what it took. So he installed a state-of-the-art security system in the house with video surveillance, cameras, motion detectors all throughout. And the system often sounded alarms. When no one was around to trigger them, it would just go off. Over the next 4 years, can you imagine? 4 years they spent in this environment. They would have 62 unexplainable break-ins. The El Paso County Sheriff's Department opened an investigation in April 1993 and conducted 45 follow-ups, but could never find any evidence of a crime. But the alarms kept going off. After the sheriff stopped responding, the Lees then hired private investigators to try to figure out what was going on. And in the next 2 years, they spent over $40,000 on security, and they used up most of their personal life savings, their college funds, and their investments. At about that time, Steve noticed something strange about photographs and videotapes that were taken in certain parts of the property. They had strange light streaks running through them, and sometimes translucent faces even appeared on the film. Now, film emulsion is sensitive to a wider range of the electromagnetic spectrum beyond the visible light, which is why the fleeting events can be caught in these photographs. 3 parts of the Lee house seemed especially prone to these unusual photographic effects: the outside wall next to their satellite dish, the living room, and the upstairs master bedroom. So Steve was determined to document the activity. So he borrowed or purchased every type of camera he could think of to see if the bizarre images appeared. But no matter what type of camera or film he used, he captured evidence of these unexplainable light phenomenon that included brilliant beams, floating balls of light, and glowing outlines of humans and animals. Sometimes the mysterious lights could be seen with the naked eye. Often, most of the time, they just lasted a split second, and they showed up only on the film that he had in these cameras. So Steve and Beth finally agreed that something paranormal might be going on in their home. And in early 1995, they sent some of the pictures and videotape to the Sightings television show. Hollywood special effects technician Edson Williams examined the Lee films, and he told the producers of the show that most of the light images would be extremely difficult to reproduce, and some seemed to defy the laws of optics entirely. Then the show's Sightings immediately dispatched a film crew to the Black Forest. And once they were on site, they were able to document some of the weird phenomenon themselves. The Sightings team brought along Minneapolis Ghostbuster Echo Bodine, who quickly identified a threatening male spirit living in the room. A sophisticated thermal imaging camera showed the presence of the ghost, who, according to Bodine, was responsible for things happening here and considered this to be his place. Bodine determined the presence of, get this, at least 20 more spirits, and judged the level of otherworldly activity in this house as, quote, monumental. She felt especially uncomfortable in the upstairs bedroom, which she said was full of spirits. Can you imagine sleeping there? And 3/4 of it is not a restful room, she said. As if to punctuate her remarks, one of the sightings cameras mysteriously flipped off its tripod and crashed to the floor. And an odd thumping electromagnetic interference was picked up by the crew's equipment and Steve's scanners, which he kept on the nightstand. And then during the filming of a discussion between Echo Bodine and Beth Lee at the kitchen table, Beth suddenly felt like someone was holding her down and complained of difficult breathing. She asked to stop the interview, and she staggered from the table, obviously distraught. Then Sherry, a member of the backup film crew, felt something go into her as her chest, her arms, and her legs all became numb. She fell into a chair and started crying uncontrollably, in abject terror, as some unseen force seemed to possess her. She had to be escorted off the set and did not fully recover until she was off the property. To this day, she is convinced that something in the Lee house tried to take over her body. During both of these emotional outbursts, the sightings equipment recorded unusual electromagnetic interference in the room. And after the crew returned to Los Angeles, Steve Lee got a photo back from some of the film that he shot during the period that showed a white dagger of light pointed directly at his forehead. The next day, he awoke with a painful golf ball-sized welt right on his forehead. He had to be rushed to the emergency room in Colorado Springs, but a CAT scan of his head could reveal no cause for the lump. And all the doctors could do was try to treat his excruciating pain. Well, the sightings crew returned 6 months later with renowned psychic investigator Peter James, who immediately sensed the pull of a powerful psychic energy vortex on the property. Then, while touring the house, James was overwhelmed by a burning chemical odor and suddenly asked if the name Howard meant anything to the Lees. Howard. Steve and Beth were both taken aback by the unexpected mentioning of the name of a dear friend, whom Beth called their adopted granddaddy for the last 10 years. As the Lees revealed more about the old man, the connection with the overpowering chemical smell became obvious. Apparently, Howard's son, Howard Jr., died of a drug overdose in the 1960s. The youth's best friend was a pharmacist, and the two stole prescription drugs and got high together. Peter James felt that Howard Jr. entered a rift in space-time on the Lee property because he wanted to make contact with his father to explain that he had not really died of a drug overdose. He had, in fact, been murdered. Steve was extremely impressed with James's revelation and asked to stop filming so he could compose himself. Steve said, "There's no way on God's earth he could have known about Howard." About a year after their first visit, sightings returned a third time to the Lee house. Peter James accompanied them once again, but this time, he concentrated his efforts on the most active spot in the house, the master bedroom on the second floor. Many anomalous events had been recorded near the entry to a small closet in the room, as well as in a 100-year-old mirror that sat on Lee's dresser. Several psychics had pinpointed the closet as the gateway to the other side, and the mirror was an endless source of photographs and apparitions and floating faces. James believed the mirror reflected the faces of the spirits going in and out of the room's gateway in search of the life force they had lost. Several photographs of the mirror were then computer enhanced to show scores of eerie faces peering back out of the mirror. In summarizing the Lee haunting for viewers, James said, quote, "There's an energy here unlike I've ever experienced in all the years I've investigated anomalous activity. So the Black Forest," he said, "is indeed a very important place that should be further investigated." Meanwhile, a Hopi shaman consulted on the Black Forest hauntings said that the area is a rainbow vortex, one of only a few psychic energy spots on the planet that connect our world with the next. Currently, there are only 2 other locations where photographic phenomena similar to the Black Forest are being recorded. Both are on private residences. One is in Arizona, and the other is in London. And visits by psychics to each of these locations seem to cause the paranormal activity to increase in frequency and intensity. And today, at the Lee house, doors open and close by themselves. Appliances turn on and turn off. Objects disappear or are hidden away. Alarms go off for no reason. Shadowy figures move silently through the house, and disembodied voices can be heard. Red, yellow, and white light forms are seen recorded, as well as apparitions of an old lady, a little girl, a burly man dressed in 1800s clothing, and a flying dog. Not to mention hundreds of forlorn faces seen floating in the Lee's bedroom mirror. When asked why they've not abandoned their haunted abode, Beth Lee replied, "Because we want it solved, and we want to keep our house. Until you walk in our shoes, you won't understand. Mainly, though, I just want to live a normal life again so we can get on with our lives." By the beginning of 1997, the Lees had spent nearly $70,000 trying to find the source of the paranormal energy and collected over 3,000 photos, 400 videotapes showing these anomalies. Steve Lee continues to this day to try to capture the activity on film. In October, he purchased an expensive infrared lens with ultrasonic trip mechanisms to take automatic photographs of the ghostly intruders. The Lees have also called in over 30 different specialists, including some of the best paranormal researchers in the country, as well as private investigators, clergymen, psychics, even quantum physicists. Several scientists have stated that the light forms recorded on the film at the Lee house do not behave according to accepted laws of physics. Bill Gibbons, who's an electromagnetics expert from Denver, who specializes in exposing fraudulent hauntings, was hired to sweep the house for electronic bugs, but witnessed so many paranormal events himself that he has returned several times on his own to try to trace the source of the energy. Gibbons believes the energy is coming from a stationary source under the house and is planning to bring in ground sonar equipment and spectrum analysis to track it. He even said, "I saw spectacular light shows that could be seen with the naked eye. It's an extremely active site, and there's nothing that Steve or his wife are doing to cause this." The Lees even persuaded a state investigator to investigate their home. Charles Duke, a Republican senator from Monument, brought his own camera and film and was able to take several photographs that showed uncanny lights and apparitions himself, a senator. Duke told reporters, "There are things happening that defy explanation around this house, and I must admit I went over there with a great deal of skepticism. It's really bizarre. I was shocked. I am not a believer yet, but certainly there is something going on there, and I don't believe in ghosts, and neither does Mr. Lee. He's just trying to get someone to listen." Senator Duke asked the FBI to investigate, but they declined, explaining that they'd only visit the house if there were evidence that a federal law had been violated. Though one FBI agent suggested to Steve that the problem might be poltergeists. In November of 1996, a writer went to the Lee property to take infrared photos. 3 months earlier, Senator Duke had taken a picture of a cloudy image that he said was clearly a dog, an apparition that had been photographed repeatedly on the property, and that Steve believes might be his own dog who died 10 years ago. The writer was able to capture this flying dog on film, as well as the frightening face of another ghost, possibly the old woman or burly man described by witnesses. And like most researchers who visit the Lee property, the writer experienced the unexplainable equipment problems and odd physical sensations while at the house. While Steve was showing Bill Gibbons and the writer a corner of the cellar that had been active lately, they all felt suddenly uneasy, heavy presence pulling at them. Although photographs taken of the area showed nothing unusual. And he tried to document parameters in the cases he investigates. The focus of his research was on the changes wrought by the paranormal events on the people involved. He has identified a kind of paranormal alchemy that produces fundamental changes in the personalities of the people that experience these events, whether it's around UFOs, sacred energy vortexes, mystery states, or near-death visions. In all of these genuine cases, the experiencer undergoes a threefold process of transformation that begins with the fiery destruction of a personal ego and material concerns. They stop caring about money. This conflagration of ego can only be quenched by surrendering to the dissolving waters of the subconscious mind and integrating the paranormal viewpoint through non-rational processes such as visualizations and dreams. Finally, the third, purified essences of the personality surface and the belief system of the individual is completely overhauled to accept and live with the reality of another unexpected side of our existence. Just read the amazing book by Leslie Kean called Surviving Death to see all of the overwhelming evidence of this. Sometimes paranormal events can even be prompted by the loss of ego, as in the blurring of personality identity that takes place deep in meditation or with mind-altering drugs, though it can be forced on people by circumstances such as illness, isolation, or withdrawal. But in many instances, the breakthrough event is perceived in negative terms because it blows away the values of everyday life. Most people just want to have a specific explanation, like this is aliens or devils or witches or occult groups or something. But in Steve Lee's case, it was the latter. He told a television reporter, "I truly think the United States government has a hand in this. I don't think any one individual could get away with this for this period of time without getting caught. The government does test out here that has military implications," Steve said. He's convinced that the government was using his family as human guinea pigs to test laser holograms and biological weapons for psychic warfare. He saw figures in military fatigues carrying assault rifles on his property and spent hours trying to photograph them. In fact, one of his neighbors obtained a restraining order to keep him from taking any more pictures across property lines. Steve accused the government of cutting off the electricity to his home when it was vacant, so they could enter it without being detected. He also accused them of spraying chemicals in his van and truck that left him deathly ill. He believes the secret agents even followed him when he visited his mother-in-law's ranch in Gunnison, Colorado, or his father's home in Louisiana. But investigators uncovered no direct evidence of government surveillance, though it would certainly not surprise anyone if certain government agencies took a covert interest in his case. Actually, Steve's explanations seemed to fit the facts, as good as any other theory. However, as the unexplainable events continue to evolve, Steve eventually incorporated their reality into his own worldview and is learning to live with it. The same is true of Beth and the children. What has changed most over the last 5 years is not the Black Forest's mystery vortex of otherworldly energy, but it's the Lee's definition of what's normal for them. Steve now says it would scare other people, but it doesn't scare us. It's kind of normal, like the way we live now. So let me know in the comments below, would you spend a night in this house? If you haven't already subscribed, please do. Turn on that little bell notification, and please share this video with someone in your family that you know likes mysteries like this. We'll see you next time, everyone.